Hey guys, it's Dave from Parts and Restoration. Thanks for tuning in to another voiceover video of one of my restorations. So this is a 1950s Walker Turner drill press. I sourced this in Philadelphia where I live for about $25. It was broken and I got it running again. A couple close-ups of all the individual parts. As you can see, it's not in very good shape, covered in rust, a lot of dirt and debris. Just seen a lot better days. Very cool. This was one of the original ones made at the Plainfield, New Jersey warehouse, or factory I should say, when Walker Turner was owned by Walker Turner. So first things first, I took this head assembly off. It probably weighed like 65, 70 pounds. Was very well stuck on there, frozen in corrosion. As you can see in that shiny area where that machine came off, there is rust in there. It was holding it in place. It was kind of a pain in the butt. That turned out to be the case with a lot of these pieces. Now this piece here that I'm taking off is part of the foot feed assembly. I could do a whole nother video on the foot feed. It's very, very cool. Parts of that foot feed accessory were left on this machine, although not all of the parts are included. I'm going to try and source those as we go. That's the table coming off right now. Now we're going to take the, this is another component of the foot feed assembly, and this is where the foot pedal would have gone. Now foot feed assembly was an accessory that allowed you to use your foot to create a down feed on the drill press. So you stepped on this pedal and it caused the drill bit to go down into the work material. That freed up your hands to hold onto a vise, or for tapping operations I hear it's great. All of the parts of that are, like I said, were not included in this machine. They're very rare. I am looking for some. If you have one or know someone who has one who'd like to sell it, please contact me. I will pay. So here we are dancing with the column and the base. This thing is very heavy. It's very awkward. Working on it like this with the weight up high was very challenging, but I needed to do it to get the base off the column. As you can see, it's frozen in rust. Even though all of the set screws are out, it was impossible to just pull it right out. So using a soft blow hammer, I beat this thing to death. I wound up being able to get it apart by banging the base down through the column, as you saw there. I was very excited when this happened, I might add. Yeah, my hands were covered in WD-40 and rust and dirt, and that was just beautiful. Now, you guys bust my balls for not wearing safety shoes constantly, but I do wear PPE when I need to. I'm all about protecting my ears, my eyes, and my lungs. So I use a cup wheel to clean all the corrosion off of this column and turn it into a lovely didgeridoo. Okay, so here's the head assembly. I've got my my hand wheel. The first things to come off here are the depth stops. Now they were really crusty and difficult to move. That is like 5 minutes worth of spinning compressed down to a few seconds. Next, we're going to take off the hand wheel assembly and take all these polymer balls off. They're plastic with brass threads on the inside. Pretty indicative of a 50s kind of a machine. Now we're going to take off the assembly that's the quill stop assembly. Now you can keep the quill or the spindle lowered into a lower position and lock it in place. And this is the depth stop coming off. Okay, in order to remove the chuck, I had to heat it up a little bit, and what I would normally do for something like this, if I had proper tools, I would use a spanner wrench to what I'm doing right now. Take that piece off. That bears against the chuck and it comes right off. The chuck is tapered on in place, and I heated it up and used those tools to break that connection free. Now this piece here is the clock spring that allows the hand wheel to recoil back to its upper position when you bring that down. And this is the pinion gear that acts on the quill and allows the quill to go up and down. And you'll see how that works in a minute. It's a rack and pinion, so the quill has a rack, and that is the pinion gear. And when you turn the hand wheel, it pushes that whole quill assembly down. This is another component of the spindle lock that I'm just tapping out. I was going to try and catch it in my hand, and as you see, it did not work. Lots of fails in this video. I was laughing my butt off when I was putting this thing together. And over she goes. Everything was always challenging. I'm working alone in a small shop, just trying to find creative ways to keep my my work pieces held securely. To work on them is always a challenge, especially the bigger stuff. Okay, so I've got a couple of bushings for these. Excuse me, a couple bushings for these bearings that I'm pushing the bearings out of. The bearings were in okay shape. However, some replacement parts that I got had new bearings in them, so I'll be using those in the final build. So I had to remove the old bearings, which I will save in the event that over time the ones I have wear out, because these are in pretty good shape. They were well maintained. So now I'm going to take the motor off of the motor mount. It's just held on by 4 bolts. Nothing fancy. Unfortunately, some of these bolts were stuck pretty well, just because of years of being in a moist or wet environment. It developed some corrosion on the threads and made it pretty difficult to break those connections. But hey, listen, that's part of the game when you're restoring old stuff like that. That's why you pay $25 for this, beautiful old machine, whereas you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and you're paying a few $100 for something that's subpar. So once we broke those connections, we're on to disassembling further the head casting. So now I'm going to take the motor mount off of its 2 round stock connections. There are 2 shafts that hold that in place, kind of like a press fit. And because of the corrosion, once again, they were pretty well stuck. You can see the rust on those turned round pieces of round stock. Of course, representing my people at Cafe Bustelo, I love them. They make my life easy. I'm using some crud cutter to remove the thicker goo and gunk from the spindle and quill. But I quickly switched to odorless mineral spirits. The crud cutter is my go-to for really thick, gunky stuff. A lot of this stuff was just baked on over the years, and mineral spirits was the way to go. So now we're back to rust removal using mechanical means. I'm using I believe that's a cup wheel on there to remove rust off of the table. The cup wheel is my go-to for a cup style wire wheel for removing old paint, rust, and other crusty debris off of machines that I'm working on. When, as you can see, you get the action that's at a 90-degree angle to the tool with the cup wheel. The wires point at 90 degrees from the tool, whereas a regular wire wheel, the ends of the bristles are parallel to the tool, poking out off the ends of their axle. So with the cup wheel, you just get a little bit more coverage as you're working on a rusty piece. Now, I did wind up switching to a regular wire wheel. It does have a very aggressive action, and also because my cup wheel just wore out, I wore most of the wires out of it. So always have an extra one on hand is a good tip. So as we go through, we're just getting all of this wire, all of these rusty particles off. I'm hitting it over and over again to get everything clean. It was just incredibly corroded. Now, I really enjoyed using my Ryobi cordless drill to get into some of these tight spots with a very small drill style wire wheel. In order to clean out those inside surfaces where the column goes, I use this small wheel here. It fit perfectly to actually wire wheel up against those surfaces, get them nice and clean. Now I'm working right now on a piece for the foot feed. This won't actually be in use when I'm done with this project until I find more parts, but I'm keeping them because they are valuable, and with the full setup, they'll make my foot feed complete. Just doing a little finish up work on the bottom of the base. I didn't really do any repainting on that, as it will be hidden, and the paint was in good shape. There's very little corrosion on there. Now I'm tapping out the plate from Walker Turner that's just got some basic information about the machine. It had a stamped serial number on it, as well as some information as to where to order parts, or mail away for parts, as it were back in the day. So I cleaned that up with some crud cutter, and then I'm going to seal that with a little bit of satin clear coat. As I often excuse me, as I often do with plates like that. Got my hand tool rescue style wire wheel, and I'm going to town on the hand wheel for the down feed on the quill. These machines originally had unpainted ones like this, nice and shiny, and I wanted to restore that original finish. I would not recommend putting your finger in that hole and running it like a fidget spinner. The keyway will rip the heck out of your finger, as it did mine. So here's our pinion gear that is used for the down feed on the quill. Just getting that nice and clean, getting all of the old grease out of the teeth, and just trying to brighten all the surfaces up. I want my machine to work well. I also want it to look nice too. It's almost like an art form to bring these things back. This is the spindle and quill, and I'm allowing the quill to spin freely. You know what, I might be saying that backwards. I'm allowing these components to spin freely and be wire brushed as they go across that wheel. That worked out pretty well for brightening them up. Okay, more grinding. We're going back to the head casting now. The head casting is the centerpiece of this machine, and I wanted it to be really clean prior to repainting. I did the very best that I could with my wire wheels. However, it was difficult to get into some of the nooks and crannies on this piece because it is complicated and it has a lot of convex surfaces. So I wound up putting this off camera, of course, in the sandblaster and getting all the paint off that way, and that was incredibly effective, especially with my new compressor if you're following me on Instagram. A little more didgeridoo action for your enjoyment. Now we're on to the motor. This was one of the Driver Series motors. It's a 1/3 horse motor that runs off of a 110 single phase. It's a good motor. It was good running when I received it, and it's even better now, but it was absolutely filthy. At some point in this machine's history, someone did a chop job refurbishing it. There was overspray on some of the japanned center surface, that black stripe across the middle, into the evaporust for some small parts. Now, once I get this machine separated, I'm able to get into the insides here. To get this pulley off, which was originally, it's like press fit, and there's 2 set screws that hold it in place. This thing was completely frozen to the spindle, and it was just a giant pain in the butt to get off. I had to do all kinds of janky leverage to just push it off of that off of its axle. It's just a giant pain in the butt. So you can see I'm using a railroad spike and some screwdrivers and using a hammer as a fulcrum and using soft blow mallets. They eventually came off, but it was a pain in the butt. So really, this portion is not necessary. The motor ran fine, but this is me being extra. And also, you do want to clean out these things. You don't want this thing running with all kinds of debris inside of it, years of sawdust. I mean, this thing probably sat in a shop idle for 20 plus years before it got to my shop. But I wanted to have everything clean. I wanted to know that there wasn't anything wrong with it. Inspecting all the individual components is crucial, and I found when I opened it that everything was in good shape. It was just dirty, just really needed a good clean. So I went in with my air gun, cleaned the dry stuff out first, and I always try and do that. If there is a lot of dry powdery type debris in something, I'd rather get it out of the machine before I add a liquid cleaner, because then it just clumps up and adds more stuff that you have to remove later, and that it worked out really well. So wear respiratory protection when you do this, so you're not breathing in all those particles. It's not good for your body. Here I'm using some odorless mineral spirits to clean all of the old oil and goo out of there, and as you can see, boom, it is super clean. I mean, that thing came out perfect. So here we've got, we're using brass brushes and odorless mineral spirits to remove some overspray from a prior restoration job that was done on this machine. It looked really janky and I didn't like it. I didn't want to leave it alone. And I use these brass brushes to get some of the grit off of these rivet heads that held that boilerplate on there. So now I'm using some triple-aught or quadruple-aught, I'm using some triple-aught steel wool to remove some stains off of that bit of the motor, and now I'm using some odorless mineral spirits to clean old oil off of these shafts, as well as that bearing assembly right there. Brass brushes, plastic brushes, having metal brushes. Always good to have an assortment of cleaning brushes around for any kind of restoration job. It's nice to have that stuff on hand within reach so that for different applications you can change. I'm actually using an acid brush right now to apply odorless mineral spirits to this portion of the motor. And once again, I'm going in with an acid brush, more mineral spirits to get all of the old oils out of this. Now, this is the kind of motor that needs to be oiled regularly on the bearings. So over the years, tons of oil was dumped into this thing, and it just all accumulated inside, as it would. So we're just continuing our cleaning. You can see on the surface there's lots of sort of brown around the outside there. That is old oil and old paint, and I'm just trying to remove that. This thing does have a really nice baked on crinkle finish that is black, as you can start to see now, that I guess is the original paint. Boom, little movie magic right there. I like that. Just to get my shop space clean. You don't need to watch me clean up. It's not exciting. So now reassembling the motor. I literally took all of the electrical contacts off of there, the little bus bar right there, to get everything clean. So I, interestingly enough, wound up building this motor backwards. I guess the polarity was reversed, if that's the right term. And when I went to run it, for the first time, the drill bit was spinning backwards, so I had to build that back the other direction. Not a big deal, just a minor setback. So we're cleaning the outside of this with acetone to prep for painting. I'm doing some masking of parts that I don't want to have paint on them, and then we will get into priming and painting. Critical to do good prep work. Taking your time to mask off parts that you don't want to be painted and to make nice crisp edges in your masks is essential. I always try and put a new razor blade on my shop knife when I do this work. It just makes it so much better. It gives me much cleaner lines. As you can see, that turned out really nice. And then I'm going to apply some tape to the shaft right there. Okay, so now we're priming. I'm using a Rust-Oleum self-etching primer, as I often do. There are lots of bare metal surfaces in this project. To be honest, I don't know if it's the best one to apply, if it's the best primer to apply to a crinkle coat finish that's already on there, but it doesn't seem to be chipping. It seems to be holding up pretty well so far, so I'm pleased with that. Then I'm using a Rust-Oleum gray enamel paint as my top coat. Now for this base, it was so rusty that I was concerned that I didn't get all of the corrosion up, and I used a rust converting primer that primed that surface to a black finish, a black prime finish, and that worked out really well. So as you can see, I've got all of my parts hanging from the ceiling of my shop so that I can paint them easily. I have such a small space, it's hard to find good spots to set up. I'd love to have a spray booth, but I don't have one, so everything gets a little bit of paint on it. It is what it is. I'll clean it up later. Now I'm masking off the surface of the table, which is a machine surface, and I didn't want it to get paint on it. And we're still priming at this point. That nice green finish that you see from is from the self-etching primer. And now we're getting into a little bit of paint. I really like this color of paint. It's, sometimes I like to go a little bit darker, but this is what the store had at the time. It's Rust-Oleum gray enamel. I think it's in a satin finish, and I really, really am happy with it. I think it looks awesome. Here we go, getting the belt guard all painted up. Fantastic. And this is not actually sped up at all. I am literally just on cocaine right now. An entire pot of coffee and I just go absolutely crazy. Okay, none of that's true, just so you know. Fast feet, dancing all over the place, getting everything done, and thank goodness we are finally on to final assembly. Here, if you remember, these old screws were completely encrusted in rust. I'm throwing a little bit of 3-in-1 oil on there, just so they don't become rusty again. It was a pain in the butt getting them out. and I don't feel like dealing with that again. And I try to do that with all of the screws on this build. Now we're installing the mount for the foot pedal of the foot feed, which I again am hoping to find. I think it looks cool, and I wanted to leave it as it was. Now we're installing the table. This table turned out really nice. Again, I masked off that table surface, so I didn't have to do any additional work on there. And then this big old bolt is what tensions it to the table. And I applied a little bit of oil there as well. Installing the cap for that, keep out the weather, any dirt and debris, and the head casting is going into place now. Now this is the lock for the head casting. This allows you to move the head casting up and down on the column. And I applied a little bit of oil to those surfaces as well. They're going to be out of sight, out of mind for the most part, and I'd prefer them not to corrode without me noticing. And we're going to get that up into position. We'll learn here in a moment that I forgot to install the upper mount for the foot feed. So that'll be coming off in dramatic fashion here in a moment. Now we're installing the bushings for those bearings. They were a doozy to come out, and they were just as much of a doozy to go back in. They have a cup that holds that that bearing in place directly down, center line of the hole. And I just used a piece of softwood dowel rod to drive those in with and beat the top fit with a hammer. Pretty straightforward, nothing fancy. And then we do a little test fit with our pulley, and it worked great. That's actually a replacement part. The one that came with the machine was busted. The guy who owned it prior was using this as a milling machine, and I guess it put a lot of side load strain on it. I don't know, that was what I was told. I'm not sure if that's the reason why that thing failed on the old machine, but it is what it is. Got a nice good spin on there, very pleased with that. And we're installing the, it's like a stop bolt that allows you to adjust the motor tension. Cool little square-headed bolts are going in. They hold these two pieces of round stock in place that allows you to slide your motor mount in and out. And 4 bolts secure the motor to the mount. So we're just reinstalling everything. I actually did use this video as a reference when I was putting this thing back together. It was really made it helpful to remember where everything went. It certainly is challenging having this many small parts and knowing where exactly to put them. Sometimes you wind up having spare parts, which is never ever good. So once everything's reassembled, we're going to put that back together with these threaded rod sections that have these very nice decorative brass acorn nuts, which some jerk painted over at some point in the past. They're just so cool. You can either use a wrench or a screwdriver to reinstall them. So pressing that back onto its mount, and now we'll install the pulley. Install the key first, and then the pulley is going to go onto that shaft, and it's secured with 2 set screws. This was the one that was such a pain in the butt to get off, but it went on like nothing at all. So we've got these 2 grub screws are going to go into place to secure that back to its shaft, and we're good to go there. Next, we're going to install the belt guard. This piece was made of cast aluminum. It was nice and lightweight, easy peasy going back on. No issues at all with that. And it, like I said, it was so light that picking it up in the air like that it was easy to work over my head with it, which can be a big problem if you ever had to install heavy parts over your head. You can see how that pivots and covers up that. So here we go. I'm going to lose control of this head here. Whoa! Scares me every time. But you just got to laugh it off. What are you going to do? I yanked on that lever when it wasn't fully secured, the locking lever, and like I said, it just crashed. I'm just glad nothing broke. So I put the upper portion of the foot feed back on, and we're just going to reassemble that head. Assembly is always fun. It's so nice to see all of your hard work coming together into being a machine again. You know, when you've got everything in individual parts, it can be kind of disheartening sometimes. It's just like a bunch of random pieces of painted metal that, you're busting your butt for. But once everything goes back together, it just starts feeling really good. That's when you start getting that satisfaction of seeing the change that you've created. So I'm just reassembling the quill and spindle assembly. Put the Put the depth stop back on, and this is the locking nut for the depth stop clamp. And then it's going back into the machine. I greased the rack and pinion gears on here because they're mostly going to be buried deep inside the machine. I want them to stay lubricated even if I'm not doing maintenance on them constantly. I always am unsure whether or not I should grease. There are times when I'm unsure whether or not I should grease or oil something. I think this was a good application of grease. So we'll see. This is the clock spring that allows the quill assembly to recoil back into its up position when after down feed is applied to it. You see this in all drill presses have some kind of assembly like that. That spring allows it to do that. Go back up into the machine. Works perfect. Original chuck is going goodbye. Boom, and I'm replacing it with a German Albrecht. I don't know how you say it. But that is a keyless chuck. It has a capacity from 1/32 to 1/2 inch drill bits. And I wasn't sure the best way to install it. I have not had to do that before. And I just checked out a Keith Rucker video on how to do it. He's the man. VintageMachinery.com. Check him out if you haven't already. That website is like my Bible. So we're using acetone to clean the bearing surfaces of that Jacobs taper. And one solid hit with a heavy hammer will secure that taper. It will lock it into place. Boom. So that's done. That's on. Very, very easy. So now we're using, this is an AccuLink link belt. I picked this up at Harbor Freight. It is, if you want to buy it local, Harbor Freight is probably the cheapest place to get it, or maybe the only place to get it. You can buy AccuLink belt on eBay for cheaper than at Harbor Freight. But I was in a rush, so I went to Old Hazard Fraught and picked some up. No regrets. I wanted this project. I needed this project to be done. I need this drill press for some upcoming work. And yeah. So now we're coming to the end of the reassembly. The very cool cast, or I believe it's cast, switch box from Walker Turner is going back on. And there you go. Gratuitous machine porn. Some cool, sexy panning shots. Not an ounce of rust left on the machine. And she is ready for some serious service in my shop. I'm very thrilled with how she came out. Just the paint looks great. It runs well. It runs smooth. The Albrecht chuck is fantastic. If you don't have a keyless chuck, just go buy a Chinese one or spend the money on the German one. They're excellent. I hope you enjoyed the blues music that I was playing for this segment. I really liked it. Check out Justin Johnson. He is an incredible guitarist and musician. He plays everything that can be played as far as I can tell. And we're going to do some test cuts. So I messed around with this is aluminum. Full disclosure, this was when this cut here that you're watching now, that was when the drill was wired backwards and it wasn't cutting. That was with a centering bit. So screwing around in aluminum right now, that's always going to be light work. This machine ate it up. Of course, I have all these different adjustable feed speeds that I can do with the pulleys. So I'm running it at a higher speed with these smaller bits and a lower speed with the larger bits. I would like to get the slow speed attachment for this thing. I'm actually getting one from a friend here shortly. Very, very much looking forward to screwing around with that. So that's in mild steel right now, and we're using progressively larger bits to make a hole in that mild steel. Had to drop my table a little bit to allow for the longer drill bit to work. But like I said, soon I'll have a slow speed assembly and I'll be able to use larger drill bits in this machine, but I just wasn't able to slow it down enough with a bigger bit. I actually tried a 3/4 bit on there and it just didn't work. It chattered. So just showing you a couple different perspectives of the drill in action. It's so cool to see such an old machine back to work. Thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Instagram. I'm now on Facebook. And yeah, look forward to seeing you in the next video. Seeing you on Instagram. Leave your comments and be sure to share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it. Talk to you guys later. Thanks again for watching.